Hello, lovely girls. How are you? It's Miss Yasmin Salim, and today we have a new session which is about the story analysis. Story analysis. I think it's going to be the second time to work on the same lesson, which is about how to analyze any story that you read as a kind of literature, as we can say. So let us work together. Today we're going to know mainly how to figure out 5 elements in any story, which is the plot, setting, characters, conflict, theme. I want you mainly to watch this video with me, which is going to guide us more in working, okay? And after that, we're going to discuss it together. What exactly important in a short story? Let's take a look. Important story elements. What are the important elements which we have? Plot, characters, setting, conflict, and theme. The setting is where and when the story takes place. When and where. The setting can have a major effect on the story. The time period is important too. So now we finish the setting. Authors reveal characters through characterization. Then we have the characters, the people who are in this piece of art. Characterization is when an author reveals the characters through what the character thinks, feels, says. Sometimes those characters don't get along. This creates a conflict. Okay, so now we finished the 2 first items, which are, yes, we had the setting, which is the time and the place of the story. Then we had what else? Characters, which are the people, the main people who are running all the events in the story, right? Throughout or while these people are talking together and living together and having all the matters of life together, they will have a conflict. C-O-N-F-L-I-C-T, conflict. This conflict is going to be the main event in the story. Let us see how. In this example, Elise is caught in the rain on her way to meet her friends. In this case, what will happen? The rain is nature, right? Interfering Elise's progress. So what's the type here of the conflict? That's right, Elise versus the rain means character versus nature. Sometimes the character's problem are with rules and societies. So many rules. So here the conflict is between what and what versus what, the character versus, yes, society. Characters also can have internal conflicts or a character versus self-conflicts. So now we had 3 kinds of conflicts we can find in the conflicts of any story. The number 1 or the first one, which is going to be about what? Yes, somebody and the nature. Always remember the girl who was trying to hang out with her friends and suddenly it rained. So here, a conflict between the character and the nature. Number two, the second kind is what? Yes, somebody and the rules, or a character and the rules, or character and societies. The third kind, which is characters and self-conflict. The same character just like suffers something which is very critical. She suffers something which is critical inside of herself, inside of her mind. She's thinking about something, she's facing a problem, whatever, okay? Now we're gonna move to the plot. Actually, the plot is one of the most important elements which we're gonna have, okay? Okay. The plot. The plot always moves from the exposition, rising action, climax, up to the top of the pyramid, falling action, and resolution. So here, the climax is moving with the actions and the events of the story from the normal case to the upper case, which is the climax, when we have a problem and we have to solve it together, or we have to think about any solution for it. So here, this is the, yeah, exactly, thank you. This is the conflict. Exposition reveals the story's setting and characters. Exposition, just like the first scenes, which are making people understand what is this character, just like the hero here, what does he work, what does he do, where does he go, who are the people who are living with him in the same house. So here we're talking about revealing all the details which we have to know about the characters, okay? The rising action must present the conflict, begins to build the action of the story. Rising, now we're going up a little bit. The climax, the turning point in the story, often very suspenseful. So here, turning point is the climax. Again, the turning point is the climax. When we reach to the point which everything should be changed. That's the climax of the story. Falling action, the events in the story begin to come to a close. We're gonna close our story now, so it's a falling action. Resolution, the ending, all the loose strings and tied up. All the loose strings are tied up. There are many other things to learn about short stories, but this will give you a good start. Of course, we have a lot of details which we have to study after that. But now we at least know how to analyze any story, right? We know how to figure out what's the difference between the plot, the theme, which we didn't study up to now, the theme. Now we know the plot, but we don't know anything about the theme. Now we know what's the conflict, how the conflict goes from, yes, down to up, how it goes from normal to climax and then to a closing, right? We also know who are the characters, who are the people, right? And after that we know also what's the setting. The setting is the place and the, yes, the time and the place. The time and the place. Stay with me.
Symbols, settings, and themes. So one of the words that we've used a couple times is plot. What is plot?
Plot is, plain and simple, the narrative arc of the story. It's what happens. There's a very famous way to map the plot, which is called Freytag's Pyramid. It's that the plot always starts with exposition, which is the narrator or the author kind of setting up the story and getting you ready for what's about to come. Then we move into the rising action, and you kind of see the pyramid building like this. The rising action is, the plot has begun, but it hasn't quite reached, the boiling point. Then we get to the top of the pyramid, and we're at the climax. The climax, a lot of people think of the climax as the most exciting part of the story, and often it is, but in reality what the climax is the turning point of the story. Once we've reached the climax, there's no going back. Then we have the falling action. This is where things like kind of start to wrap up, a few loose ends get to be tied up, and then we end up back down at the resolution of the denouement, which is basically just the conclusion of the story. Sometimes we find out what happened to the characters, and sometimes it's ambiguous, but regardless of how a story ends, there's always that conclusion, whether or not we like it or not.
What does a plot look like?
I'm going to try to do this for The Veldt, which is a Ray Bradbury short story, one of my favorites. Okay, so the exposition of that story is it starts with the mother kind of expressing her concern to the father about what is happening, and we find out a little bit about this world. She's saying she's worried about the nursery because X, Y, and Z, and so we're able to see, oh, okay, here's what's happening. We're in a dystopian world. The kids are playing with lions. Okay, so we got that. That's the exposition. Then the rising action happens as we see the kids kind of playing in the African veldt, and we see the lions get a little bit feisty, and things start to kind of get a little bit concerning. The tone of this story is just super.
Okay, so here the presenter started to talk about a story, and she narrated the story, and she went to the conflict up, and to the climax, sorry, and then she went down. So from here, I have to ask you, what is the plot? What's the plot? And what does the plot look like? What's the pyramid shape arc of the plot? How does it go from down to up? How?